Top of the morning to you. Right now it's about 10 before 5 in the morning. It is Thursday, July 17th, and I'm here to give you another edition of a Joe's Book Review for you. Today I'm finally getting back in to getting my notes together and giving you another of Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. This one here is very washed out because for some reason it's a very white cover, even though it really has nothing to do with the book itself, but this is Jim Butcher's White Knight. And this is the ninth in the Dresden Files series. It's published by Rock, which is the imprint of Penguin Publishing. And I'll tell you, it's been probably about 5 months since I did my last edition of the Dresden Files that I've reviewed here on this channel. And surprisingly, in 5 months, that was only 10 episodes ago. Which is also 155 videos ago, but only 10 episodes in this series. And if you are a Dresden Files fan, which I am, I apologize for prioritizing my other work in front of this. But for those same people, you're going to be in for a treat, because I have both this and the next book already read, and I'm going to knock them out as fast as I can, one after another. So, you should see the next one within the week, definitely. And then I'll start reading them again. So, let's hop to it now. So, where we left off in the whole series. In the 2 books ago, in Deadbeat, there was this huge battle against the necromancers. And that segued immediately into the next novel, Proven Guilty, which focuses more on Harry's best friend, Michael Carpenter, who's a Knight of the Cross. More importantly, it focuses on his eldest daughter, Molly, and she has magical gifts. It kind of comes from the mother who's stopped using magic, which we just learned for the first time. And in that book, Harry takes Molly under his wing to mentor her and teach her magic and teach her control, because she was straying into the realm of dark magic, which the White Councils of Wizards is very against and usually just kills anybody who is using it. Because the temptation to use it for, let's just say, evil, to put it basically, is too great. They don't even let them live. And in that book, it led to her actually being captured, and Harry and his friends had to go into the realm of Fae and get her back from, like, the Winter Court. It was action-packed. It was great. And like a lot of these books, there's something in it usually that has a lasting impact. That brings us to White Knight. And now we are a year later. Harry's kind of gotten back to the usual in the beginning of the book, too. You know, he generally was working with the Chicago PD, a division called Special Investigations. That's where his friend Karen Murphy worked. And they were in charge of all, like, the weird cases. Almost unsolvable cases. And it kind of became a thing where there might be magic involved in it, so they would hire Harry as, like, a special consultant to work on it, and then he would uncover it, and it would become a whole adventure, and the unit would get some recognition for solving a case that was practically unsolvable. Unfortunately, due to other events that have happened since then, since the beginning, Karen is no longer working with Special Investigations. So she can't even hire Harry to come as a consultant. But they do something like that at the beginning of this one, where there is a suicide that he's told to look at because it just doesn't look right, but she's not working for SI, and she kind of can't pay him, but he's like, son, you're a friend, don't worry about it, and that has a little banter to it, which is just enjoyable to read. But you get to go back to those original days that we're introduced to of, it was an investigation, come check it out. You get to see his using his senses and his magic, try to figure something out of, wait, this weird thing, let me just concentrate on it a little bit, make a circle, incant something or other, and see what happens. And that happens here. So he comes to this apartment, sees a person who looks like they OD'd and wrote a note So it's kind of like cut and dried. But, something just wasn't right there. So it does a little hocus pocus, magic circle, some fine-tuned juju, and he gets a clue. One of the things he had was like little iron filings or little graphite shavings, and when he does his spell, kind of blows them out into the air, and they migrate towards magic. And when they do that, there's words spelled on the wall, and the word spell Exodus 22:18. And I'll do the legwork for you. That chapter, that verse, talks about suffer not a witch to live. So, right away you have your setup. This book's going to be dealing with witches. One was just murdered and was made to look like a suicide, yet someone left a calling card. Pretty neat, right? Then, he's got to investigate another victim. Looking for maybe something else strange has happened within Chicago. Let me go talk to my coroner buddy and ask him if he's seen any bodies recently that are just inexplicable, that people might have just died suddenly with no cause, or other suicides and whatnot. So his medical examiner actually is an ally we've seen before, Butters. He's a morgue technician who's a fiend for polka. So he goes there, and it's always kind of like a wacky kind of him, either with a one-man band walking back and forth doing music, or he's just listening to it in such a way that he polka dances. It's just it's an odd little, like, quirk of his friend. And as he's doing the investigation, they do have a body there he can look at immediately. And this is where they bring in Molly again, because Molly likes to skulk around like, I want to go with you, I want to be part of this, I want to learn more magic the way you look at it. And Harry's usually very protective of her. Pardon me. One of the things that she can do is kind of like cloak herself in a way, so she might be there and he's not supposed to know it, but he can always see through it in such a way, or she clunks around that gives herself away and she thinks she's being sneaky. And he's just trying to keep her safe. Because even the two of them, between Harry and Molly, have different magical styles. Harry is more offensive with his spell work. He's shooting fire. He's targeting wind. He's calling gravity down to crush a foe. Whereas Molly is kind of like holistic-like. I mean, she can do this veil. It's like the shadow where she can cloud men's minds and disappear. Sometimes she can even widen the bubble of the veil and shroud other people in a car and whatnot too, as she gets more powerful. She's very empathic with her abilities. More mental focused. More delicate. Which doesn't really help you in a fighting situation. But now Harry actually has something that she can put her talents to and help him out. So they're in the morgue, and there's the corpse, and Harry wants Molly to kind of like go inside the mind of the body. Even though it's dead, they kind of equate it in a way almost to, there's a theory that when you die, the last thing you see is kind of like burned on your retinas. There's sci-fi stories that talk about it all the time, where like people empty the skull and put like a projector in the back of the head and shine light on the wall. And there's even a photograph thing saying like everything you see is actually upside down, so maybe they'll rotate the head upside down and then boom, there's an image. It's a common scientific magical trend in fiction writing. But they say that there's something that maybe even in the brain that can be sensed by people who are sensitive to it. So Molly gets to see the body, stand in front of it, enter it mentally in such a way. And the odd thing is, instead of going through like horror of the last moments, fright, oh my God, why is this happening to me kind of things with the body, she actually senses ecstasy. In fact, she kind of has a moment in her nether regions while she's doing this too, and everyone's like, that's just weird. Again, fun read. And she senses some kind of pattern on the abdomen. There's some kind of like energies there. And sure enough, grabs from Butters a felt pen and she marks it out. And it says Exodus 22:18. So right now, we have a serial. There's a serial killer targeting witches. And as I've said in other Jim Butcher reviews that I've done here, these kind of details, how they go through the magic and how it's sensed and how they find what they gotta find, really brings the novels alive. You know, Jim Butcher can write some incredible details about the concept he's trying to introduce to us. And it just really makes us invested in the magic or the concept that he's trying to evoke. And I personally, I just truly can't get enough of that. It makes for fantastic reads. I tell people all the time, these books clock in at like 500 to 550 pages, and you fly through them like it's only 100. As the story progresses, the investigation leads Harry to other developments. He finds out like a lot of the remaining witches that are in Chicago have kind of banded together for safety. And they've even hired Elaine to be like a bodyguard kind of thing. Now, Elaine is one of Harry's former lovers. Another woman who was raised in magic, just like Harry was, when they were kind of like orphaned. And this guy named Justin Dumorn took them in under his wing. And he was kind of an abusive mentor. And his old adage was, pain is an excellent motivator. So they grew up together, fell in love together, don't really see each other very often. Boom, she's right here in the middle of this. And even through the investigations, because if you want to talk about family and that kind of thing, there's some evidence now that Harry's half-brother, Thomas Wraith, he's a White Court vampire, has been in the vicinity and has been seen following some of the recently vanished witches. Because while he's found the 2 bodies, there are more. And there's a side story too, is because Harry doesn't see Thomas Wraith as often as he used to. They used to hang out a little bit. In fact, Thomas used to live with him for months, and it was a roommate, bosom buddies kind of thing. But Harry had noticed the few times he does see him, he seems extra vibrant. Like he's fed. And now he's full of vigor and a glow. And Harry's concerned because that feeding, you know, he could take too much from time to time. And he, even though they psychically feed on their victims, it's still stealing in such a way. They're trying to get over that kind of a thing. It's even funny because now that he's a little involved, Harry actually goes to his apartment. He's got a key. Luxury apartment, right? Goes in there. It is immaculate. It is probably like as posh as you can probably get. And while he's even there, a security guard is like, wait, who are you? Suspicious dude, unknown guest, you're not on the register. You know, and to get past this, because Harry's got to like go find stuff and get out of there without his brother knowing he's been there, Harry has to almost pretend he's gay. And Thomas was actually his lover, and he's trying to be jilted and be like, oh my God, where is he? And it just, of course he didn't tell you who I was. Why should he? And yada yada. And it's more easily able to be convincing because Thomas Wraith being a White Court vampire is just beautiful. So the fact that he was swinging that direction almost wouldn't be a surprise. And it disarms the security guard in such a way because he's like, oh, you know, we know how those guys are. Always sleeping around, always being secretive kind of a thing. And it even leads up a funny little moment where Harry's talking out loud or talking to the dog, really. And he's like, oh, thank God for bigotry. You know, quote, bigots see something they expect, and then they stop thinking about something that's right in front of them. So he's able to use that against them for his own, you know, good. And while he's inside the apartment, he actually finds a room with like one of those detective boards where it's like there's pictures and things written on the wall, maybe red string linking things along pins along the thing. So he finds this. Pretty sure a lot of the women that are in the pictures are missing witches, and it's just proof that Thomas is involved in this somehow, which obviously breaks his heart in such a way. So then we come to an interesting culmination of the whodunit possibilities and scenarios. Upon coming back to this little order of witches that are being, protected by Elaine, we get other clues. One of which that there's a certain gray-cloaked person has been seen around some of the disappearing witches in this city and in other cities too. But simultaneously, Harry Dresden is a member of the Order of Wardens. These are like the cops of the White Council of Wizards. So his standard attire is a gray cloak. So now the witches are on guard because it's like the person who might be after them and succeedingly killing them could be a warden. And this dovetails into a long-standing storyline in the Dresden Files that there might be a secret conclave of wizards within the White Council who's been feeding information to the vampires they're at war with, and it assists them. Maybe this council or whatever is trying to destroy the White Council from the inside, and they've been calling it the Black Council just to have a name for it. And it does pop up from time to time in the novels because when the band of heroes is going to try to do something, all of a sudden something else is there, which should never have known they were coming because they just figured it out themselves like 4 pages before. So it's a nice ongoing thread of saying what is the overall problem that we have to deal with someday, but it's causing us a pain in the ass today. And they do find out there is... what have I here? The investigation all finds that one term Grey Cloak has a hand in what's been going on. Okay. They do kind of like locate a guy. I think he uses a tracking spell or something like that. And they go to chase him. And of course they find that Grey Cloak is in Undertown. Undertown, this is a great thing, by the way. I think this exists, but it's a great thing that you see in books from time to time. It's a fantastic plot device. The city of Chicago, sometimes called Chicagoland, is pretty much built on a swamp. And they had built the town of Chicago, and it practically sunk. And all they did was build right on top of what they built before. So it kind of like layers city upon city. So the fact that you have almost like an infrastructure now under the ground means that people can always go hide there. They say often that there's a lot of them, like the members of like the monsters and the fae and other magical beings have taken residence there because they have homes to do that. So you can go to that territory whenever you need an interesting side quest in these books. So he tracks the Grey Cloak into Undertown, gets to spy on him for a while, and Grey Cloak actually meets up with Cal. Cal's the name of a person that they actually thought they killed back in Deadbeat in that huge battle I mentioned earlier. And these two are working together. So somehow the necromancers and others are targeting and killing witches. What the hell's going on? Why are all these magical energies coming after them as they are? And here's where we learn another element. Okay? There's something called House Scavis. Or maybe it's even Scavies. I don't know. Skavis. They're responsible for these suicide murders. Which opens up another layer of the Dresden universe. You see, we know there are vampires. And the vampires are typically held in 3 courts of vampires that we know thus far. You know, there's the Red Court of Vampires. Almost typical movie type for the most extent, but they can become human looking and walk around amongst people and not, be noticed differently from anyone else. Harry caused a war with them back in like the third book of the series, and they've been a pain in the ass ever since. They are blood drinkers, and they're causing havoc from time to time. Another faction is the Black Court of Vampires. And these are closer to the Dracula type. I mean, almost even like the Nosferatu type in a way. And they're more Dracula movie than the Red Court is, but not by much. They do sleep in dirt. I think they are hurt by garlic and items of faith, crosses, Bibles, that kind of crap. Almost like the evil vampires, if you want to put it that way. And then we've been taught about the White Court of Vampires. And they're typically human-like. And they don't feed off of blood. They feed off of emotions, like a life force from their prey actually is what feeds them. But in this book, we learn more about the subdivisions of the White Court. So in the White Court, there's like 3 houses. We've known about House Wraith for a while now. Seen them a number of times. They're typically that super hot, sexy vampire that you might see in like the WB or something like that. They tend to feed off, like I said, the sexual energies of their victims. That's the aura they're looking for. And we were introduced led by Lord Wraith, but he was later ousted by his daughter, Laura Wraith, after the events of the 6th book, Blood Rites. And his son, Thomas Wraith, is also Harry's half-brother. The next one is House Malvora. They feed off of fear. They're led by Cesarino Malvora, who's the mother of Vittorio Malvora. And they also have a Madrigal Wraith in their clan. So one of those House Wraith, I think it was a cousin or something like that, is in House Malvora. We saw more of Madrigal in Proven Guilty. He's kind of like a slasher movie producer, and that slasher movies would produce fear for him to feed on. And now we're getting more introduced to a third house called House Scavis, or Scavies, whatever it is, I don't know. They feed off of despair. They almost prefer to drive their victims into a deep depression and possibly even suicide, and then they can feed off of that. So the world is evolving as we're reading this kind of stuff. Fast forward, we find that one of the witches in the coven is actually an old foe that we've encountered way back in the first book of the series, Stormfront. The name is Helen Beckett. Because in Stormfront, we kind of learned that even before that, there's a mob boss, John Marcone, was involved in a crossfire with like a Jamaican gang. And during that crossfire, Helen's daughter was killed as an innocent bystander. So in Stormfront, Helen was using her ability to be a practitioner of magic in an effort to kill Marcone out of vengeance. And they were using a drug called 3-Eye, and sending death curses upon Marcone's business. And Harry had stopped them when they were trying to do a final incantation at the end of the first book. And then her and her husband were both arrested and charged with drug distribution of that 3-Eye. But these days, even like right after this book, whatever, we find out that she's actually Helen Beckett working for John Marcone under the alias of Ms. Demeter, and is also sleeping with him, assuming just to gain his trust and backstab him. So, because of her history of this, she's now a suspect. And during this, she actually has a video that shows that Thomas has been seen following these girls and their disappearances. So, I'm going to try to wrap this up a little bit. Again, I do the best to not have spoilers. I don't think I've done any yet, and if I have, I do apologize greatly. But, Harry tracks Thomas to the boat, finds him with witches, tries to figure out what's going on. Madrigal comes out of like a portal with ghouls and attacks the hell out of them, and we have a great action sequence that has a lot involved in it. Dresden learns that even that House Scavis attacked Elaine and the witches and puts her in the hospital. So he reaches out to other wardens of the Great Council. Hey, come on, help me out. We need your help. And they kind of like build everything towards this massive confrontation actually at the Wraith compound of, the White Court of Vampires. And in there, Harry's like, listen, because there's like all these people. Cesarino's there. Cal's not there, I'm sorry. Cesarino's there. Madrigal's there. Laura's there. Everyone's there trying to decide what they're going to do about something. And Harry actually is there, and he feels very protected because he's there under the protections of like these unseelie accords, which means people just can't kill each other sometimes if they're members of the White Council, and nor can the members of the White Council just do bad things either. So there's kind of like a pact. And Harry's there on official business, and he flat out accuses Vittorio and Madrigal of breaking the accords by killing users of magic, being the witches. So, like, I challenge you to a duel. And they accept. And then we get one of those nicely written magical fights that happen here, right in the middle of this cavern. And it's working out great until the bad guys start to lose, call in a portal. Here comes Cal and demons. Harry calls in his own portal. Here comes his friends with Marcone, with his henchmen, with automatic weapons and explosives and ba-ba-ba. And it's just a big free-for-all. What makes it interesting here is at one point, Harry's kind of like crushed under some rocks with Laura Wraith. And he's having one of those internal monologue kind of things with that demon inside of him called Lassiel. Lassiel's one of the fallen angels who actually was imbued in the 20 pieces of denari silver that Judas Iscariot had taken for betraying Jesus Christ. And the silver is attached to these fallen angels, that if anyone even grabs the coin, they will be overcome and be succumbed to the demonic angel within it. And at one point, Harry had to pick it up to save a kid, one of Michael Carpenter's kids, actually, and he got a portion of this demon within him. And this thing's always been trying to get him to use the coin, to let the demon in him, because he'll be more powerful than he's ever been before, and it's just so enticing, so tempting, that he almost needs it, especially even right now in this battle. He goes, I can use this power and win and live. But, he's talking to this thing while he's defending himself, and he's come to the knowledge that this fallen angel, because this little piece of the essence that entered him, because the rest of it's still in the coin, buried, in his basement, he gave it his own persona. Instead of Lashiel, calls it Lash. And things like, hey, you gave me a name, whatever else. It's like, listen, you don't got to do this. You've been separated for so long. And they have this conversation regarding free will and everything else, that Lash says, something, I'm going to do something about this. And sacrifices herself for him in a way. And then the battle's raging. I mean, you got swarms of demons coming through this portal. Not enough people to actually defend them. Boom, 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 boom. And who's going to live, who's going to die? You got to figure it out. And at one point, everyone's escaping as best they can. And Dresden and Laura are too far away from the portal to leave. Puts himself in a bubble. Explosions go off. And we get a great finale there. In the aftermath, we actually learn that Laura, the House Wraith girl, is kind of making these things happen. The witches and the killings, whatever else. She was afraid of something with their power and what's happening in Chicago because of it. So she actually, that's why she was meeting with, say, Madrigal and Cesarina and Vittorio, keeping what they're going to do in check. But she now vows it's not going to happen anymore. Elaine kind of heals and now has a better roadmap or underground railroad, so to speak, for these witches that are being taken care of. For his help in this whole ordeal, Marcone has actually been given a signatory of the Unseelie Accords, and he's now a freeholding baron. So now he's picked up some magic access. That's how we'll put it. Yeah, he's now accessible to the magic realm in such a way that makes him important, and you know it's going to be a pain in the ass come later on. But he got the price that he wanted, knowing that Lassiel's now faded. Dresden can now dig up the coin and give it to his father, Fort Hill, who collects the coins and keeps them, like, you know, away from people. And we finally learn that the whole thing with Thomas Wraith and why he's so full of energy, he's become a hairstylist. And he feeds off the pleasured emotions of his clientele, who are just loving his hairstyling. And in fact, he even made that murder board in his apartment, hoping Harry would see it, because he had some kind of, like, pact or promise with his sister Laura that he would not tell Harry anything. So he left the map behind, so to speak, in order to tell him without telling him. So, again, great book. Like I said, thick books, so fantastic, you read them in a heartbeat. I swear to God you do. Which is why I have the two that were so back-to-back read. So that's what I have for you today on this. Oh, and before I forget, something very, very interesting. So, I've mentioned before how I kind of follow a reading guide to these books. There's a dude online, and I actually have it printed out right here. You know, it's a bunch of pages that say, read everything in this order. Because they've got not only these books, which I think there's 18 of them right now, but they've also gotten to the realm of comic books and graphic novels. So there's been other stories that have been made, completely brand new stories, in graphic novel comic book form. And because they're new stories, it's more Dresden. But the cool thing is, it's good to know, and this little list helps me out, is when do they appear? So by following this list, I'm going through saying, okay, so for instance, read White Knight. And then I read a graphic novel called Downtown. Then there's 2 books of short stories, which, by the way, every now and again there would be a sci-fi anthology book that would come out, and they would tap Dresden on the shoulder saying, hey, I'm sorry, they would tap Jim Butcher on his shoulder saying, hey, you got any stories you want to put in the anthology? And maybe he'll put in the Dresden story. And when they collected these, because they were in like anthology books, magazines, maybe even published online directly. So when you go through this book of short stories, in the foreword it actually says, this book takes place between, say, White Knight and Small Favor, books 9 and 10. Okay, so I'm going to go through this list saying, all right, finish White Knight, read the graphic novel, read the one short story in Side Jobs. In fact, then it wants me to read another graphic novel, go back to Side Jobs for another short story, and then it has something called microfiction. And microfiction actually is very interesting because by its name, it's only like 3 pages long, maybe 4. And it has a little interesting thing in the universe. Something that was never given pages on a book to give you information on. Something he just thought of on the side. So again, the 2 books of short stories are called Brief Cases and Side Jobs. And like I said, the beginning of every story tells you where it is, but I got a list that tells me when to read it too. Sometimes it's like, you should probably read this one after you read a different short story because the events take place 1, then 2. So in this instance, between this book and the next book, the first graphic novel, Downtown, that they have you read, shows that John Marcone is already doing something as his freeholding baron of the Unseelie Accords. So the story goes right into that immediately, kind of like he was just waiting to get this invitation so he can use it. So you get a story immediately saying, hey, now that I'm a signatory, I'm doing it. The next one is called a short story called It's My Birthday, too. And it's a playful little story because it is Thomas Wraith's birthday, and Harry's getting him a gift. and you dive more into this Thomas Wraith as a hairdresser idea. So we were just introduced to the concept in White Knight, and now we've got a story about it. And you get more details of how he does it, why he does it, and why it's not invasive of his clientele. But of course, the story itself is getting the gift on a mall, and the mall's being attacked by red vampires, and you got a nice little story there. It even introduces things like there's like store elves or borrowers or whatever you want to call them that live in the mall, and you see Harry evoke them to help him out at one point. The graphic novel Wildcard. Now we get to see Molly kind of use that power we were just introduced to in White Knight, where she kind of like stands over a body, enters the mind, and brings something out of it. Although in this time, she goes, the mind is blank. They're never blank. Something happened to this person at death that is just nothing. It's void. And then you get a nice story on top of that. So rewinding. You get to read this graphic novel here because the power she's using, you were just introduced to. It might not make sense to read it earlier because we didn't know what she was doing. So now you've seen it once and you've seen it twice. And now as a reader, you can kind of imbue that in your mind saying it's part of her character, it's one of her powers. And then the graphic novel goes further. It's an adventure regarding Puck. He's Wild Fae. You get to learn more about that more. And we even get to see Karen Murphy do her own fight against a supernatural person to boot. So it's extremely interesting. And then, like I said, there's a couple little small stories in the Dresden universe that you get in these short stories, which are enjoyable. You know, one is about the mechanic who fixes Dresden's Volkswagen. That's the microfiction called Mike. One's about the bartender, Mac. And he actually enters his brewery, his beer that, you know, Karen and Harry can't ever stop raving about, enters the beer into a brewing contest. And that story actually involves Marcone's female bodyguard, Guard. And we get more about her details. Which actually leads more into her in the next book, Small Favor, which helps out as well. And the other details that come about it, like she might actually be hundreds and hundreds of years old. You know, she might actually be a Valkyrie. So the short stories are just adding more details to the larger world that for us is fascinating. So, again, I'll try to put the link to this reading list down below. As you see, I'm going through it. I'm highlighting the ones I have had. In fact, I've already read, you know, on the next page here, Small Favor, and then all the short stories after it, which from here was a graphic novel, 4 stories in Side Jobs, and 1 story in Briefcases. And then I'll turn over to book 11. So, there you have it. This is the world of Harry Dresden. This is a fascinating read. I always recommend these to everybody if you get a chance. But right now we're hitting at 38, 39 minutes. I think I've said enough. Thank you very much. Here's a little banner, probably put up here somewhere. Love the subscriptions if you got them in your power, just to hit the click button. Helps me out as much as you possibly can. And doesn't cost you a thing. Again, thank you very much if you've gotten this far. I'll be back soon with Turncoat. Oh, I'm sorry. With Small Favor. Thank you. Bye-bye.